Hello, welcome to another DBN video. Today's video is going to be a bit different because of the coronavirus. I'm on lockdown, so the game I'm going to play will be a solo game. So I'll keep it simple. It's a 12-point game and I'm going for 1812 Russians versus the French. And I'll play the game in slow time, and it'll be more of a teaching game because I'll be playing both sides. So first of all, let's have a look at the troops involved in the game. Here we have the 12-point Russian army. The units at the front are the compulsory issued units, which is 3 musket infantry, 1 light infantry, 2 irregular cavalry, Cossacks, and 2 artillery. That is a compulsory issue. At the back here is the balance of points. I've decided to go for elite troops for this game. I've got a unit of grenadier muskets, a unit of elite heavy cavalry, that's the Russian Guard cavalry, and Russian Guard hussars, which are elite light cavalry. And I've also gone, because I've run out of points, for 2 units of levy en masse. So I had half a point left, so I could have a militia unit, and if you have a militia unit, you can convert 1 militia unit into 2 levy en masse. So you'll see how the levy en masse work on the battlefield. Baggage in general. Usually the best thing to do with the levy en masse is to just leave them at the back, and they just add to the numbers of the troops you have available for your victory points. This army, its break point is 5 destroyed units. The only complexity with that is each levy en masse, when destroyed, only counts as half a point, so you'd have to kill both of those for it to count. And unfortunately, the death of Cossacks just don't count at all. So total of 5 destroyed units, and the Russian army will break. Let's now have a look at the French army. Here's our 12 points. French army, 1812. The units at the front are the compulsory issue units, 4 units of musket infantry, 1 unit of light infantry, and these are the MSLI, musket light infantry, so they can convert from light infantry to close order musket. 1 unit of light cavalry, 1 unit of artillery, I've chosen horse artillery, and 1 unit of allied muskets. And these are decent troops. This unit here is the Baden infantry. So that's the compulsory issue. The optional troops I've chosen is another unit of German infantry, and these are the Hessen Darmstadts. I'll follow up this troop presentation with some close-up photographs of some of the troops involved. And I've bought this one so that can then form a German attack column. I've gone for elite heavy cavalry with my carabiniers there, and a normal heavy cavalry cuirassier, and that's my compulsory, making up my 12 points. The arm and morale break point is 4 destroyed units for the French, so it's 4 destroyed units for the French and 5 for the Russians. And of course the Russian Cossacks don't count when they're destroyed, and I have to destroy both the levy en masse for them to count for anything. So it should make for an interesting game. I'll now show you a few close-ups of the troops, and then we'll go and have a look at the battlefield. Okay, here we have the battlefield for today. 2 foot by 2 foot, or 60 centimetres by 60 centimetres. 2 villages, which are known as non-linear fortifications in DBN. 3 woods, which are classed as bad going. We're in Russia, so I thought there's quite a lot of woods around. 2 single contour hills and road. First thing you must do is decide who is attacker and defender. So usually it's just a simple dice throw. Highest score is the attacker. I'll throw 2 dice, and the Russians scored the highest. So also the green's the Russian, white is the French. So the Russians, sorry, beg your pardon. So here we have the battlefield. 2 foot by 2 foot, or 60 centimetres by 60 centimetres. 2 villages known as non-linear fortifications in DBN. 3 woods known as bad going. 2 single contour hills. First thing you must do is decide who the attacker and who is the defender. You throw 1 dice each person. Highest score is the attacker. So I'll throw the dice now, and sorry, I'll throw so you can see them. The white dice is French, green dice is the Russian. So the attackers are the French, the defenders are the Russians. Next thing we have to decide on is the defender chooses the table edge from which to fight from. So it can be any of the 4 table edges, and the defender chooses. Because it's a solo game, I'll throw a dice and decide. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So just see how that comes. So that is the defender. So I'm playing from this position. So I'll turn the battlefield round. You can do this quite nicely and easily, and position it there. So this now is the Russian deployment zone. So what I'll do now is it works quite nicely. It looks like we're going to have both villages in the Russian deployment zone. So as you remember, the Russians deploy 600 paces in and 400 paces from the table edge, or 6 inches and 4 inches. So I'll now deploy my Russians. So here you see my Russian army deployed. As you can see, I've used little markers to position my troops. These markers over here, that's 600 paces, and that one shows 400 paces in from the table edge. It's just an aid to deploying the troops. So there you can see my deployment. I've decided to have a strong central reserve, because I don't know, when you're defending, if you deploy all your troops at the front of your army, then the attacking player can look for your weak spot and target your weak spot. So what I tend to want to do is keep a strong central reserve and force the attacker to make a decision, and then I can react with my troops to his attack. So on the front rank there, I've garrisoned the village on the right with a unit of muskets, and I've got a unit of artillery which has got the arc of fire down the centre of the table. 2 units of muskets followed, and my 1 unit of light infantry. My aim is to rush the light infantry forward and occupy the village, and that will dominate that the Russian right flank, or the left, as you're looking at the battlefield. To the rear, as you're looking at it on the left, I've got my Cossacks, and I've got my Guard cavalry. I've got a reserve artillery unit, and then on the right, as you're looking at it, I've got my Grenadiers with the Levian mass behind. So that's the Russian army deployed and awaiting the French to deploy in the attack. Okay, there you see my French army deployed. As you can probably guess, I'm going to go right flanking. The reason I'm going right flanking is I can use the hill in the middle to use the dead ground from the hill in the middle to advance my French infantry column up the middle. Where's my pencil? Up the middle, French infantry column up the middle, and assault the village here. I'm going to pin him on the left, and then attempt at assaulting this village here with my German division. There's my commander in the middle. He's in the woods, so his radius is reduced to 600 paces, but at the start of the battle that's not a problem. So this column here is going to advance forward and attack the village, and my light infantry are going to occupy the woods, and my heavy cavalry division there with the horse artillery is going to go up round the right flank and attack the open left flank of the Russian army. That's the plan. Whether that survives the first game turn, I don't know, but those familiar with DBN will know that on the first game turn the French get an extra 2 caps because they're attacking. However, the French must advance towards the enemy at least 200 paces every single turn until they are within musket range. So that's the current situation. Now ready for game turn 1 with the French to start because they're the attackers. Okay, I throw the first dice for the French. Oh, start off with a 1, goes up to 3 for the first game turn. You can see why they need that. So this particular general's low bow, so he's off to a rather slow start with 3. So that probably works out not too bad. I'm going to move this column forward for 1, move the whole block forward for 1, I'll move the cavalry and the horse gun for another 1, swing around, and for 1 more I've got to keep the momentum going so that the Russians don't have very long to react. So I will move the cavalry again. That's my 3rd one. Now imagine if I'd thrown a 6, I would have had 8 actions. I could have advanced everything a lot closer, and that would have really intimidated the Russians. That's the best I can do for my first move. That's 3 actions. Firing, the phasing player fires first. The only thing I can fire would be the horse artillery, but it's way out of range. The Russians, the only thing they can fire at the moment is their foot gun, which again, as you can see, this contour blocks, creates dead ground behind here, so this gun cannot fire anything over the top of the hill here. So this column is actually protected, so the Russians are going to have to react to this move behind the dead ground. So that's the end of the first move by the French. Let's now do the Russians. So here we go, Russian move, and he throws a 5. That's pretty good. Let's move to what we're going to do. Well, obviously I can see this threat coming over from my left flank, so I can now react with my best troops to hold this position. I want to get my artillery and my grenadiers over there, and I'm going to need my elite cavalry as well to to try and take back some initiative, I'm going to send the Cossacks galloping round the French left flank. That might just take the initiative back. So with 5 actions, let's see what I can do. First of all, I'll move my Russian grenadiers over for 1. I'll move them out of the way for another 1. Send them out of the way there. And I'll move this artillery over for 2. That's 4. I've got 1 more. I'm going to move the artillery again. So that's my 5, I'm afraid. 3 on the artillery, 2 with the infantry. Firing, nothing's changed, so that's the end of the first game turn. Okay, French for all of 5, that's much better. So I'm going to continue the motion, bearing in mind that no troops can come within 600 paces, which is the length of this stick. So I'll just put that there, so I know I can come up to 600 paces and no closer. That's 2. So I've got 3 left. So I'm going to move this block forward twice. Again, I can't quite go twice. I'm only going to get to there. That's 4 actions. That's 4. Got 1 left. So I'll move this guy out of there so that he can keep his command and control going. I think he's down to 200 moving in bad going. So I'll just bring him out of the woods. Still within 600 of them, and now he's all within there. So that's the 5 for the French. No firing for the French. Okay. Again, another 5. This is General Barclay de Tolly. Don't know if you can see that on there. Just put little tabs on the back. If they're a good general, they'll get a +1. But for these 12-point games, all the generals are just par. So it's Barclay de Tolly, and he's through another 5, so he's performing very well. So he's got 5 actions. So let's get my foot artillery into action, or moved. Remember, foot artillery cannot move and fire. So what I'm going to do is that. So at the moment he's out of range, so I'm okay. So he's moved to there. This foot gun is going to, I think it will move actually. This foot gun is also going to move, and it's going to move to the forward corner of the village, which will greatly improve its arc of fire. So that's 2. I've got 3 actions left. I failed to move my Cossacks last turn. Those who know the rules know that the Cossacks have 1 intrinsic cap, so they can move once for free every turn. And I didn't do that last turn, so I'll have to do that this turn for free. So I'll do that now before I forget. And it's actually, they're moving 500 paces, which is quite impressive. So that's the Cossacks, that's for free. So 1, 2, I've got 3 actions left. I need to get my cavalry over. Again, heavy cavalry there, moving at 300. That's once. twice. Things are quite tight round here. I've got another move. I will bring my grenadiers into line. That's my 5 actions then. So that's the end of the Russian movement. The Russians have got no firing, both their guns have moved. The French, they've got a range of 600 paces. However, there's nothing in their arc, so the French are still not firing. So that is the end of the second game turn. Oh, about time. Lobau gets a decent score. He throws a 6. So, right, well, I need to advance my horse artillery and cavalry. They're going to go to there for 1. My attack column is going to continue its advance for another 1. It's either going to work or fail badly, but I think I've got the weight of numbers there at the moment. Remember, I've got to kill 5 Russians. So that's 2 actions. Remember, if you're within 600, you can't move a second time. So I will move this column forward. I can move it 3 times, but yeah, I can move it 3 times quite comfortably. So that's twice. Third time. And again, a note on the rules: for the third movement, or the second subsequent movement, it is by individual column. So if I was to move this formation a 3rd time, the 3rd time would cost me 3 caps. If I was to move that whole formation. So if you're moving units 3 times, a single column is always the best way of doing it. That's 3, 4, 5, so I've got 1 left, so let's get him up on the top of there. Now he's going to have a bit of a challenge now, because he's got troops either side, one that side of the woods and one that side of the hill. So he's going to move up here, but it's going to be awkward because he's only got intervening terrain there, so he's only got 600 paces. So it's going to cost 2 to move that formation. Can't do it any other way at the moment. Right, that's the end of the movement. Firing. Let's have some firing. The French horse artillery has got a choice of target. I think it has. Yeah, choice of target. It's within 300, which it's not. It's just, beg your pardon, it's just outside of 300. So it can choose its target. It can either fire on the village or it can fire on the Russian artillery. Well, it's going to fire on the Russian artillery. Because the Russian artillery has just moved into position, so it can't fire back, can't the Russian artillery, so it makes it an easier target. And it isn't classed as counter-battery fire because the Russian artillery has moved. So it's a good time to fire on the Russian artillery. So let's throw some firing dice. The French are on a 3. That's their intrinsic fire factor. The Russians are on a 3 for foot artillery. However, the Russians are not firing back, so they get a -1. So the Russians are on a 2, the French are on a 3. So let's throw the 2 dice. Russians end up on 3, French end up on 5, so that's French beat the Russians, but not by double, so that's 1 hit on the Russian artillery. Normally, an artillery fire on each other, if both haven't moved, then you have to double your opponent. That's counter battery fire, so it's a lot more difficult, but when it's moving, it's easier. So that's the first firing. The Russians have got some firing now, so that Russian battery now, oh no, beg your pardon, it can't, because that Russian battery moved, so there's no more firing. That's the end of the French turn, over to the Russian turn. Okay, battle's hotting up, and the Russian again, Barclay de Tolly throws a 5, very impressive. So, Russian artillery is going to stay put and fire. So is this Russian artillery. I've got 5 actions again. I'm going to get my cavalry through the gap. It's outside of 600, I think. No, it won't be, sadly. So I'm afraid the best that they can do is 1 action. That's as far as the cavalry can go at the moment. It's a tight space, can't be helped. I think I might have left this too late to try and get in the village. Three, 4, come down off the hill there. So I've got 1 left, and what I will do that 1 left, I'm going to move the Cossacks 500, and then they'll get their intrinsic one as well. So that's the one I've paid for, and they still have an intrinsic one left, as long as they don't come within 600. So they've got to stay further away than that. So what they will do is they will make a rush along the edge, like so. Remember, it's 2 victory points, or 2 counts as 2 casualties if you destroy your opponent's baggage. So I'm afraid the French cannot ignore them Cossacks. So that's the Russian movement. Russian firing. First of all, we've got the Russian guns. I'm going to fire this gun at this gun, both going to fire at each other. This is now classed as stationary because it hasn't moved. However, this one did move. So what's going to happen here is the reverse. The French now have to double the Russians to cause 2 hits, or to cause any hits, and the Russians only have to beat the French to cause a hit. So both fire at each other, so it's 3-3. No need to bother with the dice, I don't think, this time. So it's 3-3 plus the dice, and in this case the Russians win but not by double, so they cause a fluff hit on the French horse artillery. So it's on as even at the moment. This time the Russian gun can fire, and will fire at the French infantry on the hilltops there. The French are on a 4 basic factor, and the Russian artillery is on a 3 basic factor. No ups and downs, no support, so it's just 4-3 to the French, and of course the French are just defending. Ooh. Russians threw a 6, the French threw a 2. Total of 6 for the French and a total of 9 for the Russians, so that's a hit on the advancing French column. There you go. Any French firing? No, the only French firing would have been the gun, and that's fired. So that's now over to the French movement. Let's see how Lobau's going to do this turn. Pretty grim, Lobau. You're not performing through a 2. 2. I can't do an awful lot with 2. Got the threat there from the Cossacks. I want to try and jump into this village. And if I advance again, then it will definitely be contested. It's probably worth a try. But I've only got 2. Maybe not worth a try. With only 2, I'm going to have to send my cavalry over. So these cavalry are going to go that way for 1. And my second one, I will maintain my column of advance attack. So that is coming on. But I'm going to leave that one there. So I don't want to get too close to the rest of the supporting Russian infantry. So at the moment, that is my movement of 2 caps. There we have it. That's the French movement. French firing. Got firing here this time. I'll do the guns first of all. The 2 guns firing on each other, both on a 3. This time it's counter battery fire, so they both have to double each other to cause 2 hits. That's the way it works. So both on 3, and Russians through a 2, French through a 3, so that's definitely not double each, so it's ineffectual. And so it should be. A lot of counter battery fire is often a waste of artillery ammunition, but maybe the French artillery should have started firing on the Russian infantry. But the Russian infantry at this time are all, musket infantry are all classed as stoic, so they're very difficult to cause casualties with firing. However, their musket fire is 1 class lower. I could have explained this earlier on, but this is a quirk of the time. Russian infantry was very stoic, but its musketry was very poor. In 1813, the following year, their musketry had greatly improved following this campaign in 1812, and the training had improved. So their musketry is normal in 1813. However, apart from the guards and grenadiers, they'd lost their stoicism. So that's how it works in DBN. So the artillery is fired there. So we'll now fire. Let's have a look at the range. Are we within 200? Yes. So this French infantry unit will fire on the village. It has to. Remember, if you're within 300 paces, you have to fire at your nearest target. And it will fire with the light infantry in support. The village will obviously fire back, and it will fire with the artillery in support. So both units have got support. The French have a basic factor of 4. Where's my small dice? Not yet, there we go. French have a 4, however, the firing into cover, so it's down to a 2. Russians have got support, it's down to a 1. The Russians start off with a basic factor of 4. The muskets are firing as militia, so they go down to a 3. I've already explained that to you. And the French have got a support, so they go down to a 2. So it's, at the moment, it's 2-1 to the Russians. with these 2 units firing and them 2 units firing. So let's see how the dice throw goes. Well, there you go. The Russians end up with 6, French end up with a 4. Therefore, Russians win and cause 1 hit on the advancing French attack column. The historical bonus the French get in this period of the Napoleonic Wars is their attack columns are particularly good. So a French attack column will get a bonus of +3, and all other nations only get a bonus of +2. So that's the unique thing for the French army at this time. Obviously it doesn't apply to the Germans. That there is the end of the firing in the French phase. So it's now over to the Russians for the Russian firing, Russian game turn. Okay, Barclay de Tolly, he throws a 1. He's losing his nerve. Barclay de Tolly seems to be panicking a little bit now. He's only got 1. What does he do with 1? Could really do with more than 1. I'm gonna have to move my light infantry into the village. They are not garrisoning the village yet, they've moved in. The following game turn they will be garrisoning and can fire out. At the moment they can't fire out, but they cannot be shot at. So they're just sat in the middle of the village. So the French would have to attack into the village to attack them. But the best the French can do at the moment is move up to the edge of the village. They haven't got enough movement ability to move inside. So because the French didn't move up last game turn, it's allowed the Russians to occupy the village. That's the Russian 1. So Barclay de Tolly, you need to do better next time. Got the free one with the Cossacks, always useful. What the Cossacks will do is they will shake out into line formation. So they're being a pain there. Okay, firing. Russian start the firing. Russian artillery will fire on counter battery again, and the French artillery can fire on the village if they want to, and the French artillery are going to fire on the village instead. Okay, so what that means is this time basic factor for the Russian artillery is a 3. Basic factor for French artillery is a 3, but it's not firing back, so it's 2. So the French are just, on this firing round, the French are just defending themselves. However, the Russians still have to double them to cause any hits. So here we go. The French get a high score that could wipe out the French. The Russians get a high score that could wipe out the French artillery, but they don't. Russians end up on a 7. The French end up on a 5. So the Russians win, but they have to double. So no effect there. But the French artillery didn't fire, so the French artillery will be firing in support. So moving swiftly along, the artillery here have to fire at their closest target now, which is there, so they're going to have to fire either these fire and they're going to fire in support. So we'll do this again. So we've got the French unit here, sorry, the Russian unit here, sorry about this. Russians on a 4, they're firing as militia, so they're down to a 3, and they're firing at the muskets. The French have got 2 supports this time, so that goes from 3 down to 1. The French muskets are returning fire. Their basic factor is a 4. They're firing into cover, so they're down to a 2. The artillery are firing in support, so they're down to a 1. So this time it's 1 each plus the dice throw, the difference being the artillery firing support on the attack on the village. So it's 1-1, and believe it or not, it's another 2 1s. Don't happen that often, is it? So it's a draw, and in firing, a draw means ineffectual fire, no casualties. So that's pretty good for the French attacking. So they've not been, they're not shaken attacking the village. So that makes quite a big difference for the attack. Anything else to fire? No. So that's the end of the Russian firing. Over to the French. Okay, low bow, let's see what you're going to do. Low bow. Napoleon's going to be having a word with you. He threw a 2. What's he going to do with the 2? Right, well, one thing he must do is attack with that column. He can't not go in now, really. He's not going to win out, I don't think, with the attack column unless he charges in. So that attack column is going in. I'll move the whole lot in, like so, and I'll take the lights in as support as well, like so. That costs 1, leaves 1 left, and what I will do with the 1 left is I don't really want to move the artillery. As soon as I move the artillery, of course, I become more vulnerable. However, I might need to. I'll play the waiting game at the moment and see if this attack pays off. I will move. I'll move these boys to there. That's my 2. Okay, firing. Guns are going to shoot at each other again. These guns can't fire on the village now because they're masked by their own friends. So the 2 guns are going to fire on each other. 3-3. And it's a draw, nothing happens with the guns. These can't shoot at each other because they're within and not lining the outside. The only other firing is the Russian artillery there, they're going to fire on them. So it's a 4 for the French, basic factor, and a basic factor 3 for the Russians. So it's 4-3 for the French. French are defending. That's total of 5 for the French and 7 for the Russians. So the Russian artillery is firing well. Causes another hit and now shaken on the French. And that's it for firing. Down to the crucial bit now, the combat. Okay, so what we've got here is a French attack column supported attacking a village which can't be supported. It's not easy defending a village. Villages are good for protection but very difficult to defend, which is how it should be. They're not that impressive. So the basic factor of the attacking French is 4, but they get 3, extra 3 for being an attack column, so they're up to 7. So that's 6, and 1 is 7. Okay, the Russians are on a basic factor of 4. They're not classed as militia or anything because they're not firing, they're in close combat. They get +1 for the village, defending the fortifications, that brings them up to 5. However, they get -1 because there is a French support, so that takes them back down to 4. So there you have it. French are on 7, Russians are on 4. Let's see what we get. Oh, that's a decisive victory for the French there. Russians end up on a 5. The French end up on a 7, 12. So that is double. The Russians have been doubled by the French. Therefore, the Russians are destroyed. If they weren't doubled, they would have taken 1 hit and been pushed out of the village. But they're destroyed. Therefore, the French can occupy, which they will. They can't fire out. Remember, they're just inside at the moment. And that unit was involved in the combat, so it can follow up. So the French did very well. They're now inside the village quite comfortably. What should be happening now is the Russians should have some infantry to charge back in and counter-attack. But unfortunately, there's no Russians that can do that, apart from the cavalry. The cavalry can charge into the village. It's a risky option, but they may well choose to do so. But it is risky. Combat inside a village, there's only 2 units are allowed to combat, 1 from each side in the village, and they both fight as being in bad going, which is a bit of a penalty for cavalry, severe penalty, so they probably won't charge in. That is the end of the turn for the French. First. Okay, Barclay de Tolly, let's see how we deal with this. Yes, he's definitely losing his nerve. 1. He's only got 1 action. So what's he going to do? Well, the big problem with, if he had more caps, then he could do something. But this is a real problem with only 1 cap, because once they garrison, they're going to be shooting the artillery in the flank. They're going to be shooting these cavalry in the flank. So they've got to do something with 1. So with 1, the only thing I can do is something really bold and throw the Russian Guard hussars into the village and try and catch the French whilst they're still disordered, which they're classed as a bit, well, the class as being in bad going at the moment, which is a negative for French muskets. So it's their only chance. So with the 1 cap, is going to throw the Russian Guard hussars charging into the village, and they'll combat with the French infantry in the village. Risky strategy. If the French cavalry lose, if the Russian cavalry lose, they are destroyed, because any cavalry in bad going is automatically destroyed if they lose in combat. That's the big risk for the Russian cavalry. I've still got 1 intrinsic movement with the Cossacks, because they are Cossacks, so they will continue. They will have to sort of face up, so they're going to have to do something like that and face up the French cavalry. If the French cavalry don't charge, because they haven't got the caps or anything, then these boys can still go off on their own. So the French have got a real problem with the Cossacks at the moment. There we have it. That's the end of the movement. Over to firing. Russian fire. They're going to fire on there. Some counter battery again here. 3-3. Counter battery fire. Ooh. Russians end up with a 9 and the French end up with a 5. Not quite good enough. Nearly though. Other firing. Russians will fire. They can't see 2 points of that unit, so they can't fire on that unit, but they can see 2 points on that unit, so they will fire on that unit. The basic factor for the French is 4 for muskets. They're only defending because they're out of range firing back. And yeah. And they're on a 3. Basic factor. These are being canistered, so they're down to a -1, so they're down to a 3. They're just defending. They may well be in range actually. Yeah, they are just in range. However, they can't see 2 points on the Russian artillery, so their fire would be ineffectual. This unit is in the way and is blocking their field of fire onto the Russian guns. So both units are on a 3. They're on a 3 because they're being canistered, and the French are just defending. That's a 3 each, no supports. Luckily the French win. They're just defending, so no casualties there. The defenders of the village are now garrisoning, so they can now these moved up to the edge of the village, so now they're garrisoning. They are now in combat. Okay, so this will now be a combat here. There is no more firing, so we've got combat here and combat here. We'll do this one first. The light infantry, when garrisoning a village or built-up area, have a basic factor of 4, +1 for the village, puts them up to a 5. So the Russians are on a 5. The basic factor for the French is a 4, +2 for an attack column, puts them on a 6. So they're on a 6, and the Russians are on a 5. Oh. Okay, that's 7 for the Russians and 11 for the Germans. So these take a hit and are pushed back a base depth. It's not all over, because light infantry will come storming back in, and light infantry like bad going, so there's a good chance that the light infantry will be at an advantage in the next round of combat. Okay, round to this one here. The French start on a 4 for being muskets. French start on a 4 for being muskets. However, their class has been in bad going, so they're down to a 2. The Russians start off on a 3 for being light cavalry, up to a 4 for being elite, -2 for being in bad going. So it's a 2-2. If the Russians win, the French take a hit and push back. If the French win, the Russian guard cavalry are destroyed, because cavalry in bad going in close combat are destroyed. So it's the Russians need to win this dice throw, otherwise their cavalry are dead. And they don't. The French win the dice throw. Okay, so the French are going to be able to garrison that village now. And unfortunately the Russians are now dead as doornails. So that's the second Russian casualty. and I'm afraid things are not going their way for the combats. So that's the end of the Russian move turn and Russian turn and firing, and the French are now looking quite strong. It's over to the French. Okay, low bow, throws a 2 again. They can now garrison, and they can now garrison. That's going to cause a lot of problems for the Russians. They've got 2 actions. These have got to charge, and they will charge for 1. Leaves him 1 action left. What can he do that's the most effective? I think he's got to capitalise on the capturing of the villages. He will be firing on the village. Will be firing on the closest target, which is either that gun or that gun. So it's going to fire on that gun. So what we will do is, what I'm going to do is I am going to go for the Russian gun, and I'm going to do that. Let's see how we get on. I won't get too close, so I'll do that. So I don't want the Russian infantry to be firing. So that's my 2. So over to firing. First of all, start from this flank. The garrison here fires on a 4. They have to fire at their closest target, so the closest target is the Russian infantry. So these boys are going to fire on a 4, being muskets. These will return fire on a 4, but they're classed as militia when they're firing, so down to a 3. They're firing into bad going, so that puts them down in firing into cover, that puts them down to a 1. However, they have a support there, and sadly for the Germans, they have 2 supports. They have a support there and a support there, so that brings them down by 2. So that's these Germans firing from the village onto these Russians who are firing as militia, but the Russians have got 2 supports. Final score 2 for the Germans, 1 for the Russians. Let's throw the dice. 4 each, so luckily the Germans win, so that's a fluff on the Russians. Next lot of firing for the French. This village has to fire at the closest target. Well, the closest target is there or there, so the French get to choose, so they're going to fire in the flank on this Russian gun. The Russian gun cannot fire back, so the French are firing on a 4. They're firing into the flank of the artillery, so they get an extra +1 for firing into the flank, so they're up to a 5. The Russians start off on a basic factor of 3. The Russians are not firing back, so they go down to a 2. Okay, there is no other supporting fire. The Russian guns here cannot fire on the village because they can't see 2 points. Again, because of the angle, the fire will be ineffective. It's just the the way the rules are, but they're going to have to fire at the light infantry. So we've got the firing here, 5 versus 2, and the Russian artillery is just defending, it's not firing back. Ooh. So the French end up with 11, the Russians end up with 5, Russians take 2 hits for being doubled. Not very nice. Well, I'm afraid they're in a bad position. More French firing is these lights. Obviously this gun can't fire. They're blocking, they're shot on there. These lights on a 3 versus the Russian artillery. So the French lights are on a basic factor of 3, however they are being canistered, so they're down to a 2. The Russian artillery is on a 3, wrong coloured dice there. Russian artillery is on a 3, however the firing on light infantry, so they're down to a 2. So there we have it. And this is why light infantry are a real threat to artillery. 2-2. And the French win, so that's a hit on the Russian gun, which now makes that Russian gun shaken. Okay, so that's the end of the firing for this turn from the French. The Russians, they've all fired. Guns fired, but the Russians have still got this gun to fire, which is now unfortunately shaken. The Russians can either fire at that unit or that unit. Both of them are just defending. So actual fact, they'll try and get some blood and they'll go for this unit here. So they're on a 3 to start off with, but they're shaken, so they're down to a 2. They're on a 4, but they're shaken down to a 3. So it's 3-2 to the French, but the French are just defending. Well, that's 6-5 to the Russians. So that's another hit on the French. So that's that first French unit destroyed by good, accurate Russian gunfire. So that's the end of the firing. And we'll then have our combat. The only combat we've got this game turn is over here. French light cavalry are on a 3, basic factor of 3. Cossacks are on a basic factor of 1. However, the Cossacks have got support, so light cavalry down to a 2. So it's 2-1 to the French hussars. Oh, decisive. Okay, that's pretty decisive. That's 8-2, so that's more than doubled. So I've just got to quickly look at the rules. It's the first time I looked at the rules for a while. Cossacks doubled in combat. Destroyed by mounted or if in bad going, otherwise flee 600 paces with 1 hit. Well, because they were beaten by mounted, they are destroyed. So they're destroyed. Now what happens now, the French light cavalry have destroyed their opponents in close combat, so they do a breakthrough test. The breakthrough test is quite simple, anything but a 1 or a 2, and it's a controlled breakthrough. And if it is a 1 or a 2, it's an uncontrolled breakthrough. And they get a 5, so they have a controlled breakthrough. So what they will do is immediately charge them Cossacks on the flank like so. So we immediately fight another combat here. This time again, same thing, the successful French hussars doing a marvellous job here on a 3. Cossacks on a 1, however the Cossacks are being attacked in the flank, so they're a -1, so it's 0. So it's 3-0 to the French. Oh, you won't believe it. 4-4, so it's a draw. So what happens in a draw is both units take one hit and both units of cavalry bounce. So what happens here, both take a hit. Cossacks did well there. What happens is the Cossacks turn and face, go back a base depth, and the French cavalry go back a base depth. And that's the end of that cavalry combat there. That's the end of the French game turn. The French have now killed 2 units still and 1 Cossack, but remember the Cossacks don't count as casualties. So there's still a lot to be fought for, although the French appear to be in a strong position at the moment. Okay. I've now put the casualty markers on the battlefield, which makes it a little bit more interesting. I haven't got one for the dead Cossack. There's a dead Cossack there. Right. Let's see how Barclay de Tolly does this time. And he throws a 1. He's had 2s and 1s the last 3 game turns, so his luck has really changed. With 1, gosh, can't do very much. He's got to do something. His artillery here is completely messed up. I think he got to somewhat write the artillery off, I think. And I'm going to for 1 action, in fact, I'm not going to write the artillery off. I'll move the artillery to there. Just means that they will now fire on this unit here and not them. They will get to fire first, and they'll fire on them, and they will fire in support. So it may well work out okay. So that's my one move, my complementary 1. These are going to move off because they can. I'm going to make a rush for the baggage train. It's a bit crazy, but there you go. That's what the Cossacks were good at, and the French have allowed the Cossacks to get around the back of their flank, so they should have tried to stop that. So that's the Russian movement done. Russian firing. They will fire their gun on the light infantry, and the light infantry will fire back with the village firing in support. So the artillery is on a bit of a sticky wicket here. Let's see how that works. Russian artillery, basic factor of a 3. The Russian artillery is shaken down to a 2. It's firing at light infantry down to a 1. And the French have support, so the Russians are on a 0. And the French basic factor is a 3, but they're being canistered down to a 2. And they can't find support and they're out of range. So it's 2-0. There we go. Russian artillery is need to do well, and they don't. I'm afraid the Russian artillery is gone. Russian artillery destroyed. Need to put a casualty marker on there, which I will. Other firing for the Russians. Can they now fire? No, they're definitely still out of range. Firing here, we've got these are the closest, so they're going to fire on the village with 2 supports, and the Germans in the village firing back at the closest target, which is there. So the Russians start off on a 4, down to 3 for being militia, down to 1 for firing into cover. The Germans start off on a 4, however they're being fired on by 2 supports, so they're down to a 2. The light infantry, hopefully we're going to be able to charge back in, but I moved the guns instead. So again, Barclay de Tolly only getting 1 cap has caused a lot of problems. 2-1 to the Germans. However, Germans end up with a 6 and the Russians end up with a 7. So it's a hit on the Germans. So not getting it all their own way. So that's the end of the Russian firing, and that's the end of the French firing. The French gun over there can't do anything, I'm afraid. So that's the end of the firing. No combat, so that's the end of the Russian turn. Over to the French. Okay, let's see what the Russians are going to do. The Russians have only killed 1 Frenchman, French unit, so they need to kill another 3, where the Russians only have to lose 1 more and they've lost the battle. So, Barclay de Tolly. And Barclay de Tolly throws a 1 again. Absolutely lost his nerve. What's he going to do? Okay. Barclay de Tolly has thrown another 1. What am I going to do? Russians are in a bad state, really. All they can do is take the fight to the enemy. That's their best crack. And they're going to move the grenadiers like so in an aggressive advance. That's their 1. The only other thing they do is the Cossacks can pour it on. The Cossacks are going to move 500. Or 500. They're after the baggage. If they destroy the baggage, they're only Cossacks, so they might not even get to destroy the baggage. But if they just capture or destroy the baggage, they get 2 victory points for that. So that puts them a lot closer to winning the game. They've already got 1 victory point for destroying the French unit, so they only need to kill 1 more, but I'll have to wait and see. That's the end of the Russian movement, Russian firing. So, doing this one first again. This time the closest unit is, I'll just quickly measure that. That one. Clearly this unit of light infantry is the closest. So they're on a 3, -2 firing to cover. So that puts them down to a 1. They don't fire 1 class lower. It's only the muskets that are firing 1 class lower. So they're on a 1. They're on a 4, 1 support, so the French are on a 3. So it's 3-1 to the French. French win, as has been the case so far, with 7-3. So that is double. Unfortunately, that destroys another Russian. Russian Jaegers dead. Moving swiftly along then. Russian firing, Russian grenadiers firing on the lights, and the lights will have 2 supports. So it's a tough time for the Russians. So the Russians start off on a 4. They are elites, but they're down a class when they're firing, so they stay on a 4. The French have got 2 supports, so the Russians end up on a 2, and a French basic factor of 3. So it's 3-2 to the French. Lights and grenadiers shooting each other. Oh, both sides throw a 6, so that's a hit on the Russians. Russians want to get in with a bayonet, really. That's their way to go. However, points to note, the Russians are stoic. Nearly forgot that. So the Russians have lost by 1, so I'm afraid they gain 1 for being stoic. You have to read the rules if you're not sure how it works, but the stoicism has saved the Russian grenadiers, not for the first time. Unfortunately over here, the stoicism, the light infantry are not don't get the stoic bonus. They don't suffer the penalty for poor quality troops. Right, that's the end of the firing. No combat. Any other French firing? Don't think. Oh no, that's it. So that's the end of that turn. And I'm afraid to say the Russians have lost 6 units. 2 units of artillery, 2 lots of infantry outside the village here, and they lost the defenders of this village plus the guard cavalry, hussars charging in there. So I'm afraid the Russians have lost the battle. That's a victory to the French. Another game turn. The Cossacks could have charged the baggage, but the Cossacks have a combat value of 1. The baggage has a combat value of 1. So it would have been a 50-50 dice throw to see if the Cossacks would have captured the baggage. But there's a good chance if they'd done that would have been 2 victory points, so equivalent to 2 casualties. So there you saw another 12-point battle. These DBN battles never seem to play out as you expect them to. As I said to you, I planned on a French attack around the Russian left flank, and this is what I've achieved. My attack on the village was very successful, better than I thought. I did a better job playing as the French than I did of the Russians. The Russians never got organised, but it was down to Barclay de Tollet's really poor dice throws for his caps. He started off really good when he didn't need it, but for the last 4 game turns he's thrown nothing but 1s and 2s, which is pretty incredible. But that has made all the difference. Lobau, last few games turns, has thrown poor dice. However, he was in a strong position. He'd got himself into a strong position, so it didn't matter. But when Barclay de Tollet needed to throw high, he didn't, and it made all the difference. And this was just a mess from the Russian point of view. The French were able to storm into the village, took the village, and never looked back. Russian grenadiers, yeah, they're a threat. You know, they're stoic and they're elite, so they would have dealt the light infantry a bit of a severe kick in. The Germans did very well taking that village. And the light cavalry over there sat there in the open. So there you have it. As per usual, all these pretty, very tough looking cavalry never even charged, and the same with the Russians. But if you know anything about big Napoleonic battles, that's often the case. The guard reserves and heavy cavalry often spend the entire battle just sat there waiting to do something, and they never even got into the charge, but the threat was there. Thank you for watching the video, and everybody please stay safe at home in this bad and difficult times. Thank you.